What's a rather poor therapeutic strategy to heal trauma and abuse? Become a global superstar. Welcome, mere mortalites, to another round of the Mere Mortal Book Reviews. I'm your host here, Kyron Down, live on the 8th of the 1st, 2025. Indeed, this is a normal time for me, 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on a Wednesday. Would love if you can come join me live, as we do have someone in the chat right now. Now, as you might surmise, this is the podcast which will take me to my ultimate goal of being the best book reviewer in the world. Okay, no, I'm not going to be doing that. But we do have someone who has reached the heights of stardom, and for some strange and perhaps unhelpful reasons. We've got the autobiography here of Unlovable by Darren Hayes, who is also known as the frontman of Savage Garden back in the day. So this book was published in 2024. A new book. Kyron, why are you reading this? Well, I've got a special connection to this book, so I'll be talking about that. 376 pages in length. I'd say it took me about 5 hours of reading to get through, just because the actual writing on the pages is rather large, so it's not a super dense book. Now, as I mentioned, autobiography, so this was written by Darren Hayes himself, and it's mostly about his childhood, growing up here in Brisbane, which is where I am located. Once again, why this connection is going to become rather important and prominent, and details mostly his upbringing. So his turbulent life at home and at school. He had to endure a lot of bullying, going through the musical ups and downs with Savage Garden and the albums they produced and touring, before then moving on to solo projects for himself. And I suppose just going through various stages of his life, details struggles with his sexuality, and I suppose road to healing from the many abuses and things that were caught up with him and were causing him a lot of struggles throughout his life. So this consists of a fair few chapters. It doesn't have a index at the start, so I can't particularly talk about how many there were. I think there was probably 20 to 30 in total, and it'll have titles such as I Don't Belong Here, or let me quickly find another one. Icarus Falls to Earth is another one. So they're usually just due to what is going on in this next section of his life. There's also an inset right in the middle with I don't know what you call it, a plate, I believe is what it's called, where the actual feel of the book is different. It's more vinyl-y. Which will have a lot of photos from his childhood, from his time in Savage Garden. Here's him singing on stage. Here's him with a teddy bear. Very nice. And the book itself is told mostly in a chronological style, so it does go from him as a young man or as a boy, developing into I guess the man he becomes, but with these pretty frequent flashbacks where he'll dive back into the past. So it'll say something like bolded interior psychiatric's office, San Francisco, 1999, when in the current time it would be a little bit later than that. Okay, let's jump into the themes and questions. So all this section I'm going to be talking about will be, I suppose, centered around dealing with abuse and strategies to counteract the suffering that then comes from that. Another theme you could take from this book would be homosexuality, but I think that more connects into the problems that he was having in his life, and the book is, after all, called Unlovable, so we'll focus on that for the moment. For those of you who don't know Darren, I will be doing kind of the author section right here. So he grew up in the 70s and 80s. He was born in the 1970s, I believe, early 1970s. And throughout his childhood, he had a huge influence from Michael Jackson, for example, pop stars, just in fashion. He was very much interested in that. And musically, it sounded like he actually didn't have that much formal training, at least in the start of his life, and it would be more just him singing along to songs in the car with his family. Now, he always had, I guess, homosexual leanings, is what I would say in this book. He was very effeminate. He would call boys cute when he saw them on TV, for example. It sounded like a lot of people in his family knew that he was homosexual or likely to be. and this was probably also contributing to his bullying in childhood. But what really dominated his childhood, from what he talks about in this book, was the violence from his father, mixed in with this kind of feeling like an outsider, especially in school, which is, that's where you feel that a lot. So it sounded like probably 95% of this was verbal. His father was, from what I can tell, very alcoholic, lived a hard life himself, and transferred this abuse over onto his children. The cycle of abuse. I think we've all heard of that before. And with bouts of, maybe 5% of the time, I don't know, I'll be guessing, but every now and then of extreme physicality and violence. So what we see in this book would be beatings from his mother, black eyes. He would get spanked so hard that he'd have bruises. At one particular instance, his mum, brother, and sister were all kind of kidnapped by his father, and he was left at his uncle's house. Blood noses at school, some of those that he would contribute to other people when he got violent himself. So these periods dominate throughout the book. 2/3 of the book is told before he is even 26. He is 52 years of age at this current moment. So even though it was only half of his life up to this period, it contributes to 2/3 of the actual book. And just as he is entering global stardom with Savage Garden, which ran that first album and touring. So we see most of the book is centered around the struggles in his life. And it's not so much about the music per se. Obviously, that plays a big contributing part into what we're actually hearing in the book. But it's not the focus on this. The focus is more on the trauma and abuse, hence the title, Unlovable. So why was he unlovable? Actually, I'll get onto that in a second. A little bit of a caveat here. The thing about memoirs is they are a very one-sided story. And this is a memoir from the voice of Savage Garden, is the subtitle of this. So, for example, there's a couple of things in here which you have to take with a grain of salt or acknowledge, okay, there's going to be an opposite side of the story. One of this being his bandmate, Daniel Jones. So there was a duo, Daniel Hayes with the black hair and Daniel Jones with the kind of more mousy brown, and who stated that the reason was Daniel wanted to break up the band because he didn't like the fame and stardom. But then Daniel would go on to say that the reason was that Darren was the reason they were breaking up. Who to trust in this situation? I'm sure there was miscommunication. I'm sure there was people saying this, people saying that. Memory distorts things. I'm going to just leave that for the moment. He talked about how big Savage Garden was. I grew up, I was born in 1992, so I got a taste of what Savage Garden was because they were very popular in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I do remember as a kid watching Rage, which was think of it like the Australian version of MTV during that time period of my life. And Savage Garden was very prominent on there. I do remember a lot of the songs. Some of them are To the Moon and Back is a fantastic song. I love that. And then even ones like Truly, Madly, Deeply, they're classics to me. But I was like, are they kind of a one-hit wonder? Because I just remember that album. But no, my dad was saying they were extremely popular for an extended period of time. The amount of time they spent on having a number one song on not only Australian and English charts and other countries, but in the US, the kind of big one, was a ridiculous amount of time. Especially for something like I Want You, and the double album success also backed that up. As he was talking about things in this book and mentioning songs, I would jump onto my phone and YouTube and play a song, and it was like, oh, okay, yeah, I do, I actually do remember Affirmation. That is lodged into my brain, even though it's been a long time since I've actually listened to it. The fact that in my gym right now, there is a remix of I Want You still playing, I think still attests to the fact that they produce some very, very catchy music, that this being what, like 25 years after I Want You was created. 20 more than that, which is also known as the Chicka Cherry Cola song. I always thought that was Chicken Cherry Cola. Now that I know, which made no sense to me, now that I know it's Chicka Cherry, it still does not make much sense to me, but it's a very popular song, and lyrics don't need to make sense all the time. So everything else related to his family, his dad, how he grew up, of course, we're just going to have to take him as his word, because who's going to read a book from his dad's side of the story or his sister's? Like, it doesn't make that much sense. So all of that, that little bit of a caveat we've got out of the way here. Let's jump into, I guess, the actual trauma, the abuse, and how he tried to deal with it, the main theme. So I think his personality very much affected the way that he dealt with very hard situations in his life. So obviously, if you're a young kid, you're growing up in an environment where there's violence, where there's verbal abuse, where there is, threats of violence, where you're very unsure of where you're living. He moved house, it sounds like multiple times. It sounded like a very chaotic environment. Animals, he was forced to do jobs that, you wouldn't expect a kid to do. It sounded like they had a kind of lower class upbringing as well. So money was probably an issue. It was an issue. They didn't have a lot of disposable income. All of that contributes to a very stressful childhood for a kid, for sure. He's a very emotional person, and I think this emotional baggage from his childhood really stayed with him. If I had to put a humorous spin on this, crying would probably be his second greatest hobby after singing, because, man, he does a lot of crying in this book. I would say he probably mentions crying at least 15 times, if not more. So, an emotional person for sure. And I think he's lived a challenging life because of, obviously, the trauma and abuse, but hanging on to it as well, or perhaps being chained to it is another way of expressing that, because he does have an attempt at healing or dealing with these things, and he doesn't do it in a great way, especially at the start of his life, and talking into his early 30s, if I had to put a number to it. So he was semi-hiding his sexuality throughout his time in Savage Garden, and certainly was repressing it when he was a youngster, and going through high school, and even beyond that. He married a woman. He had girlfriends for periods of years. He was married to a woman whilst also discovering and knowing that he was gay. That's not very indicative of someone dealing with these things happening to him, or these acknowledgements of his own personality, character, in a healthy way. He had to conform somewhat to what the music industry wanted of him. So think of the frosted tip black hair, style wise, it seemed to like he'd have some options as to what he wanted to appear like, but then the music industry would also push back on this and say, no, like, you need to look like this to appeal to our fan base, or what we think the fan base is, etc., etc. Trying to please people too much. He had a lot of body issues from the sounds of it, because he wanted to appear, sexually attractive for his partner, and not for himself, and not for the, pleasantness of being healthy, of very much still trying to get validation from his father, as he was growing, as he was entering a period of his life where he was now famous, and so his dad was now supportive of him, and things like this. So we can see his healing and coping strategies were largely ineffective, and just added to his problems. Thinking that fame, money, and validation would solve your problems, I'm not sure there's anyone ever who has said, yeah, getting famous solved all of my problems, and I'm really happy for it now. It seems to be like fame is mostly a big downside to your life with some small additional perks, is what I've gotten from all of this. And he talks about how he would create an alternative personality for himself to get through these hard times where, even though he's living in this terrible situation, he's going to be a global superstar and everyone's going to love that person, and then he won't feel this unlovableness that he is feeling, when he's an 8-year-old and is on the way home from school, going to a home where he's terrified and is, peeing the bed, having nightmares, all these sorts of things. So, we see, okay. And he also, takes to heart what random reviewers and critiques of his albums would be. It sounded like he was very much needing not only the validation of people around him, but of the world in general, of large. And you can't please everyone. That's impossible. There's people who will fight against you for the very reason that you want to be loved by them. So that's it's impossible. We could see even just using money to buy favors from his friends, and employing his friends, keeping them around as an entourage, of buying dinners for them, of supporting his, you can understand supporting his mother and brother, but then it extends to his dad, and then extends to his sister to run the fan club. And man, there was even the ones who have unconditional love for him, he was still just doing some bad strategies, I guess, to get over what this unlovableness that he felt. Understandable. All of this understandable as a kid, as a young adult, but this is where you'd hope to see that some progress would be made over the years. And I think he does do a better part of this in the later part of his life. It's more condensed, so it's hard to tell exactly, but he does things like moving away from the spotlight, and taking time off completely from the music business. He marries for love, so one of his partners that he talks about in the book, who I believe was married to for the longest period of his life. He marries him for love. He talks to therapists. He takes medication when he's suicidal. All of these are what you would probably call better strategies of coping, of even having fun, of living life, of enjoying your life. And he also seemed to drop a lot of the other bad habits from before. Some of these were forced upon him via financial means, of extending himself too far financially, and so then having to, reel back support. He can't pay his dad for his lifestyle that he's living anymore, or employ his friends and things like this. So, and some of them are choices that he actively makes to live in better locations, to move away from New York City, which was depressing him, and move to California and San Francisco in particular, I believe. So he seems to be on a better path, and it's very good to hear that at the end of this book. Some things still indicate that he's probably still viewing, I guess, the validate, or still seeking perhaps validation from other people, such as when he talks about how it was really nice that homosexual was being viewed positively, which was one of his later albums as a solo act being produced out. That's still slightly worrying. It's nice for sure to have people say nice things about you and your work. So that's okay, but I guess only if it's in small doses and you're still deriving the vast bulk of your pleasure from the act of creating the work. It's hard because when you're an artist, you're releasing these things to the world. You want validation, I guess, and success. And success is a measure of creating good things, and I understand that. But I, for example, hope that he would not take to heart anything that I say being just a random dude on the internet, and aren't we all just random people on the internet at the end of the day, unless you are very, very close to him. So it's funny, I actually feel a rather strong affinity with him, despite our many differences. I'm a straight, uncreative engineer who shuns the spotlight. So that's completely opposite to his personality, which is, flamboyant, gay, attention-seeking, creative to the max. So although there's very much differences, I think it's because our reactions to situations and interpretation of events is kind of similar. It seemed to be rather delayed. He would take time to acknowledge or realize the way that I'm feeling is related to this, and it would perhaps be years after the fact where he's like, I'm not in love with my husband anymore, even though he was probably feeling this within his body much earlier. And he talks about how he has, I can't remember the animal, it was bees or wasps inside of his stomach, which were indications of a negative event happening in his life, particularly, if his father shows up randomly at this caravan park, even though they've been hiding out there to spare themselves from him. He feels it first and then interprets it later, which is very much what I tend to do as well. He's got this people-pleasing agreeableness, hands up, that's me to a fault. A hidden force of will, and some scary anger and rage, which which scares him himself. I think I've got a bit of that in me. And also an ability to live a life that is not normal, to reject the 9 to 5 and follow your own path. So the only big difference, I guess, between us is, I'm so happy and glad that I had personally an ideal childhood, and simultaneously sad that he had to endure what he had to endure, and that he didn't have that, because if I look at my mum and dad, they gave me the comfort, the security, the love that I think he didn't, and that really messed him up for a long time. And it sounds like he's doing better, but these sorts of things, perhaps they never go away. So that's on the trauma and abuse and dealing those coping strategies. Let's jump onto the extra author, some extra details, and a little bit of a connection. So, the whole book is about Darren Hayes, so I'm not, don't think I need to give extra about the actual author. Instead, I want to explore why I read this book in the first place. So, one thing I find weird, and to be frank, I rather detest, is about the biz, and this could be the Hollywood business, this could be scientific papers, it could be award ceremonies, artists, influencers, etc., is this listing out of everyone who has ever had a minor role and touch of playing in whatever it was that was created. There's a lot of that in this book. I think this is mostly a Chiron problem that I just dislike, and that other people don't seem to find this as annoying and detestful as I do. And I think this is because probably when I see it, I see it mostly as name dropping for the sake of name dropping. I knew this person, I got to meet this person, we did this together. Whereas a lot of it is probably them just wanting to acknowledge, hey, Savage Garden, the success of that was not just two people, it wasn't just Daniel Jones and Darren Hayes. It was a huge assortment of people, from the actual creation of the music to the promotion of it to the logistics of touring. There was a tremendous amount of stuff that was going all within that, and so it's right to acknowledge those people as well, especially if you have an opportunity in a 376-page book. So I get that. And it works, because this is a real big lead into the most important paragraph and sentence in this book, which you will find on page 117 and in the acknowledgements. So here we go. I have to thank my music teacher, Susan Lansdowne, for first spotting my ability to sing. In year 8, when I was a completely terrified newbie, she noticed my fledgling voice and recruited me for the school choir. This might sound like something very normal, but back then I was one of only 2 boys in the choir. It was considered very gay to sing in the choir, so of course at first I refused. But then I heard them. They weren't singing religious songs or classical music, but pop music. I instinctively knew what to do. I joined. And then right here in the acknowledgements at the end of the book, we have this sentence here. Thanks to my first high school music teacher, Susan Lansdowne. May you rest in peace. So, if you are not a fan of the Mere Mortals podcast, the other podcast I do with my friend Juan, who also appears on here, you will not know that Susan Lansdowne was my mum. So she passed away last year in May of 2025, and yes, indeed, she was the high school music teacher of Darren in, I believe it was in grade 8 and grade 9, which would be the equivalent of age 13 and 14 in the rest of the world. So, my mum was not a name dropper. And while I and some select other people in her life knew that she taught Darren and had an influence on him, most people didn't. And there was actually a bit of a shock at her memorial when Darren very, very kindly sent in a letter, which was read out during the memorial service. And people were like, "Holy shit!" Darren Hayes is taking the time to write a handwritten letter to my mum. I believe it's handwritten. Actually, I'm not 100% sure of that. So Sue, who was my mum's colleague at Maple Park High School. So this was the high school that he mentions in the book. As I mentioned, Darren was born in Brisbane and lived here. So this is where I'm at this very moment. This is where I grew up at the same time. Did I ever cross paths with him? Potentially as a baby, when my mum brought me to school and when he was still in high school, I believe. But that's a little bit off the fact. And Sue, who was Darren's music teacher in the later years of his high school career, when Darren was coming to Australia for his Do You Remember tour in 2023, organized to say like, hey, we'd love to come see your concert and perhaps get a chance to meet you and things like this. And Darren, once again, very, very kindly allowed my mum, Sue, and her some immediate family members to come see him do the rehearsal I can't remember what it's called, pre-stage rehearsal, pre-rehearsal, and a little bit of meet and greet with a bunch of other kind of mega fans, where once again he had some very, very nice words to say, and then we got to see the concert afterwards. So he's a very lovely man for writing that and saying those things, and for giving my mum that last last bit of joy, I guess, in one of the very tough periods of her life, before her life got very, very tough and things like that. So a big acknowledgement and a huge thank you to him for saying those things about her, and it was very, very, very lovely, and I know it meant a lot to her and to myself and my family as well. The thing, funny, one of those things he mentions in this book, that time period in his life when he was in Brisbane for this tour, and I got to see him on stage, and kind of he'd be 5-10 meters away, and he'd just be talking to a kind of small group of people of us. And the one thing that he mentions in this book, which was kind of startling, was he seemed to be saying not things like this, but acknowledging, like, it's been rough being a solo artist, of the finances of that, but I'm such a pleasure to be here. I'm having a time in my life. I love performing for you. Very happy guy. What he mentions in the book was that he was going through a challenging divorce at that time. Financial pressure of the tour he was losing money with this tour, I believe, or certainly with some other ones, and was having suicidal thoughts even then, which is rather shocking. It's like, wow, you never know what's going through someone's mind, and what position they're in. Even if you think they might be on top of the world, it sounded like he was going through a very tough period when I personally got to see him. But he did have sick abs, is what he also mentioned, so maybe it was all worth it. Yeah. Not only was he an amazing songwriter, but it carried over into the actual writing of this as well, of the book. So I was surprised at how well he weaved the stories together, and really exposed his inner struggles. Now, all of this was super real to me because he's talking about my childhood in some senses, because I grew up in Brisbane. I lived right next to the Hyperdome, where he talks about going and performing there, and where it was close to where Daniel Jones lived, I believe. He went to Maple Park. My mum taught there. I know that school. If he was to talk about classrooms or the entrance into it, I would know what that looks like, because I've been there so many times with my mum and dad. Every reference that Aussies just take for granted, talking about lollies, servo, yabbies, formal, the esky, that language transports me back to that time of me as a kid. He has to spell it out for foreigners in this book, i.e. Americans, which does become a bit tiresome probably for them to read, like, oh, okay, this is what he meant. And then also for me, because I know what he meant. But it does help me visualize instantly that time period of Brisbane and in the late 90s, early 2000s for myself. So that was very good. I did enjoy that. Summary, similar book, recommendations. Look, there's a strange book review because I lived through part of this. So there's a deep personal connection for me whilst reading this. My dad was the one who actually gave this to me to read because he got it himself, and he actually went to, I believe, Darren's tour of the book when it was in Brisbane just last year in 2024. So he bears his soul, and I get the feeling he's not fully finished through his journey of heartbreak and love, of rejection and acceptance, of failure and success. It's an evocative book when you're reading it. Now, look, personally, there was probably a little bit too much of the, I hesitate to say victim mentality, but it was all about his struggles. And I would have loved to have known more about the, actual singing training that he went through, of the financials of, what it was like to run these tours, how did these things occur, why was he losing money, I'm not sure I'd be interested in the music business as a whole, and I know that if he talked about it, I would be absolutely disgusted at what actually goes on in there. Personal, more positive things, I guess, about his life, because it was very about all the hard things, and it's not particularly fun reading about these things, but it is true life. So put that with a grain of salt there. So rating wise, like how do I give this? Do I rate it based on my personal connection, or what I think the average person would potentially get from this book? If it was just a personal one, I'd probably put it in the seven-ish category, because there were these instances where I was like, I knew my mum's going to get mentioned when he's talking about Brisbane. That connects pretty deeply with me. But for the average person who is not a mega fan, especially of either Savage Garden or Darren Hayes, I'm not so much sure that you're really going to get anything from this. So I'd give it maybe like a 5.5 out of 10 for that respect. So Unlovable by Darren Hayes, it's a book which has a close connection to me, but is something I would never read normally. And hence going on to the similar books recommendations, I don't read biographies very often. And if I do, it's going to be on a historical character. Johnny in the chat actually mentioned that the present tense writing of autobiographies drives him up the wall, which there's all of this in this. As he's talking about his childhood, it's not this detached version. It is more the living in as viewing his childhood from the current present tense, and so that contributes to partly why I don't really read recent books. I also don't particularly like that. If you want similar books recommendations, type in your favorite musical pop star from the 90s or the 2000s. There's almost certainly they've got a book, and if not an autobiography, there'll be a biography or memoirs or things like this. So do that. I think the only biographies we have on this channel are of Elon Musk, actually, and maybe a historical figure or two. I did one of Gandhi. So yeah, if you want that out, check that out on the channel. Last section's here, value for value. This is a podcast which is always going to be available anytime, any place, anywhere for anyone. And there's never going to be any sponsorships, nor advertising, nor, this book, I'm sure, had a bit of press related to it, of perhaps he was, sending out free copies to people to review or things like this. I didn't get any of that, and nor do I want any of that. And if that ever does happen, it probably means I'm not going to review the book, to be honest. The reason I do this is because I love reviewing books, and I love imparting what I've learned from these to the people at home. So if you get any value from this, I just ask that you return it. And you can do this many ways: time, talent, and treasure. Time, join me live as Johnny is here right at this moment, or give a little like, a share, a comment on this on either YouTube or via any of the social media platforms. Create a clip from this if you feel like doing that. You can do that as well. Talent, I would love to know similar books, recommendations, things that you think I would enjoy, or perhaps even recommendations or things not to enjoy. I would love to really dive into that, how I could also even perhaps make this better for you. And then finally, treasure. There is a PayPal link down below. This does cost money to host the audio, to create the time to do this, to replace equipment when necessary. So all of this is very much appreciated if you support the show in a financial sense, and we like to talk about that and acknowledge you for doing that when that does happen. All right, final section here, live. I am, as I mentioned, live here, 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Times on a Wednesday. So, plug that into a computer and find out when that is for you. I would really appreciate, as I said, recommendations, but what's coming up next? So I am doing a kind of, it's not a book review because I've already done it a bunch of times, but The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, or also known as O Alquimista by Paulo Coelho. So I'm going to talk about translations at some point. That will probably be in 3 weeks' time. Next week, I plan on doing a review of Daybang by Rush V. This is going to be another fun, personal connection book, and also one that you're probably not going to be able to find very easily. So that one's going to be fun. And 2 weeks' time, I'll be doing, what's it called? It's all about cancer. The Emperor of Maladies is what that book is called. I haven't learnt the author's name yet, so I'll be doing that shortly as well. Then I got plenty other books sitting on my nightstand over there. If I can see it. No, you can't. It's just over there. So plenty of things coming up. I think Juan's got scheduled a book review of another Ryan Holiday book, as he likes to read Ryan Holiday. So very much coming up on the Mere Mortals book reviews. We will be doing this consistently is what you can expect from us. So I hope you're having a fantastic start to the new year, and I will see you for the next book review. Ciao for now. Kyron out. Bye.